Dorin Gardner Schumacher, and I want to talk about the days of silent film. One of the things I wanted to do, and happened as I was going along trying to find my silent movie star grandmother, Helen Gardner, I was learning about silent film and that whole period in which she was making movies, which was the earliest days of the American movie industry. The American movie industry today is one of the United States' biggest industries, and it's globally important. So in those days, people were experimenting. The first thing was that they discovered the miracle of motion on a screen, capturing human movement, capturing any movement on a movie screen. And this was considered miraculous by people who were watching. There had been a long period before this where inventors were inventing ways of capturing motion, inventing cameras, inventing projectors. It was all very cumbersome, very difficult, very, you might say, primitive. But as they were perfecting the technology, people began to be able to make movies. And the early films, the very earliest, were very simple. They were just films of workers leaving a factory. What an amazing thing. Here are photographs, moving pictures of workers leaving a factory. There was a famous one called Fred Ott's Sneeze, which the whole thing was about a man sneezing. There was a film of a dancer who had a very flowing, elaborate, beautiful costume. There were photographs or movies of boxers, a pair of boxers boxing. And then, of course, there was the famous one where the camera was showing an oncoming train. And it was so realistic and so amazing that the story is that people, the audience, ran out of the theater screaming because they thought the train was going to come and hit them. And they would be killed. So there was all of this amazing excitement around this new technology. The early films were the early commercial films were generally one reel long, which was 15 minutes. It took 15 minutes to play. So how much can you cram into 15 minutes? You have to tell your story very quickly, get in, get out. Movies were shown in what was called Nickelodeons. They were storefronts where you paid a nickel to go in, and there would be a diverse program of short films, these short one-reelers, vaudeville acts, somebody dancing, somebody singing, dogs, you name it, you know what vaudeville was like. So there'd be all of that interspersed with these one-reel films. And there would be somebody generally playing a piano and making a musical accompaniment to the film. So as the industry began to develop and people began to make more films, make them a little bit more elaborate, I tried to learn what Helen Gardner's life would have been like when she was on the set, starting at Vitagraph Company of America that had studios in Brooklyn. The early movie industry was concentrated in New York and New Jersey. So she was at the Vitagraph studios in Brooklyn. There was a set, a simple handmade set, and there was a camera set in front of the set on a tripod. It was hand cranked. And the actors, they would come on the set, they'd be on the set, and when they finished their lines, they would move off the set. And then the next actor would come on and say the lines, and then move off the set. So it was like a stage play. The actors came on, and they went off. And that was the kind of environment that Helen Gardner was making her early films in. Short, to the point, and they were silent. So the directors could give instructions to the actors without being overheard. So that made it easy for the directors. And the actors, in the beginning, didn't have regular lines. There was no script. They would just say whatever they wanted to say. Hey, Joe, how are you doing? How's it been this week? But the audience was able to read lips. And the audience didn't like this because they knew that the actors weren't really saying their lines. And so they complained about it. So then the scripts had to be written and the actors had to really memorize their lines. The lights were very bright. To capture the light that could be caught on the film, so they had very bright lights, a lot of makeup. The movies had a very bad reputation in the early days. The middle and upper classes thought they were really what we would call today lowbrow entertainment. They, middle and upper classes, said that the movies are of interest to the slum dwellers, loose women who went there without escorts, dirty working men, prostitutes, riffraff off the street. But how did they know who attended the movies? They snuck in themselves and went to see them because they couldn't stay away. The advantage that early silent films had for the immigrant population, and there were huge waves of immigrants at the time, was that they could understand the action without understanding English. There were what they called intertitles, which would be a screen that would have words on it that would explain the action. So that helped for people to understand what was happening. But the English was not necessary to understand the story of a silent film. Now, Helen Gardner, my grandmother, rebelled against this image of movies being low class, and she was going to make films that were of a high quality, that high quality, high class people would come to and enjoy. They would be elevated. They would be as beautiful and as compelling and as literary as a stage play, with the same kind of tradition behind them. The names of the actors and actresses were not known in the beginning. The producers, the movie producers, didn't want to say what their names were because they were afraid if they became famous, they would demand more money. But the audiences clamored to know who they were. They wanted to know the names of their favorites. So the producers then gave their names out in public. And guess what? The actors demanded more money, and they got it. But those were the days of the early Charlie Chaplin films, the early Keystone Cops, Harold Lloyd, Buster Keaton, Mary Pickford, Rudolph Valentino. Those were the great silent stars. And Helen Gardner was actually making her films pretty much earlier than most of those people were. Talking pictures did not come in until the late 1920s. Unfortunately, 80 to 90% of all silent films that were made are thought to be lost. And so what's left is the ones that just happened to survive. And so we really don't know all of what was done. But in the case of my grandmother, it's very interesting that 29% of her films have survived. I'm going to talk about the company that she established and the pioneering work that she did and how unusual that was for the time. There are many people today who believe that silent films were the best that were ever made, the clearest, the most compelling, the most beautifully produced. And that era is lost, but it's becoming known and it's becoming popular again. And I hope to increase its popularity by my work and my publicity about my grandmother and her contributions.